In today's video, we'll be learning on how to simplify unions and intersections. So let's start off with this problem. Find the indicated union or intersection and simplify if possible. Express your answers in interval notation. So we have our interval right here. And the first thing you want to do is determine if you have a union or an intersection. So you have a union if you have a U in the middle of your interval. And that's going to be union. An upside down U indicates that you have an intersection. Now, there's two separate ways to do the simplification. So in this case, we have an intersection. So I'm going to show you how to simplify it with an intersection. So we have to take a side of the interval. Let's say we have this -1 to 5 part of the interval. Let's take that one. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a number line for it. So we have -1 on the left, +5 on the right. So your parentheses indicate that you have a hollow point at that value, and a bracket denotes that you have a shaded in point at that value. And let's just shade in the region just to show that this is where the interval lies. Now, we're going to draw the other interval, but we're going to draw it to where they line up as if they were on the same number line, but they're not. Now, it might sound a little weird, but I'll show you. So we have bracket 0, 8 parentheses. So whenever we draw this number line, we want it to line up with the top one as if they were on the same number line. It's just they were broken into two pieces. So we have 0. So 0 is going to be in between -1 and +5. And then we have +8, which that has to be to the right of 5. So we're going to go to the right, and we have +8. So for 0, we have a bracket, so that means we have a shaded in point. And at +8, we have a parentheses, so that means we have a hollow point. And then we shade in this region. Now, I think you can visually see the intersection going on. So if you see, if we draw 0 and we draw a line above it, we can see that these shaded regions, the one above and below, they overlap. So we can easily visualize the intersection doing it this way. So we have 0 and 5. And then all we have to do is write out if they have a bracket or parentheses. So 0 and 5 have shaded in points. So they're going to both have brackets. And that's your answer. Let's try this problem. So here we have a union. So it's going to be a different strategy than the problem before. The problem before we had an intersection. We had that upside down U. So for this one, we have union. We have the U. So for your union, it's more straightforward than an intersection simplification. All we have to do is create a number line and plot all these numbers and just shade in our regions and put our shaded in or hollow points on it. And then we'll be able to easily see how to simplify it. So let's draw a number line. So we have 4 values given to us. That's why we have 4 lines. So what we're going to do is start from least greatest to greatest. So -1 is the least greatest number out of those. And then the next one after that is 0. Then it's +1 and then +6. Now, next we have to do is determine our shaded regions. Or sorry, not our shaded regions, our points. Are they hollow or are they shaded in? So at -1, it has a parentheses. So that means that it has a hollow point there. 0 has a shaded in point because it has a bracket. +1 is going to have a hollow point since it has a parentheses. And then 6 is going to have a shaded in point. Now, the next thing you're going to do is shade in your region. So according to this interval, it's from -1 to +1. So we have to shade in that region right there. And notice that -1 to 0 and then 0 to +1, it's split up into 2 areas, but -1 to +1 is that whole thing. Then we have 0 to +6. Now this one is a little tricky. So whenever you have a hollow point and your interval lies in between there, and you know your interval is going to be between there, you have to shade in that hollow point. So I'll show you what I mean. So if we go from 0 to +6, this is where the interval lies. It's going to be from 0 to 1 And then since it can be from 0 to 6, 1 is in between 0 and 6. So now we have to shade in this hollow point. And then we shade in from 1 to 6. So now we can simplify this whole thing. Notice that it starts from -1 and then it ends to +6. In between there is a whole shaded in region, just one shaded in region. So therefore you can simplify it. So we have -1 and it goes to 6. -1 has a hollow point, so we have a parentheses there. And then +6 has a shaded in point, so it's going to have a bracket. And that's your answer. So let's do this problem. So we have an intersection because we see that we have an upside down U. So we know that we're going to have to split the interval and create a number line for each side of the interval. So we have -∞, +4. So let's draw the number line for it. So we have -∞, which we can just write a arrow for it instead. And then we have 4. So -∞ has the arrow, so it indicates that it's a hollow point and has the parentheses. And then +4 has a bracket, so we have to use a shaded point there. Now, for the second part of the interval that we're going to make the number line for, 0 to +∞, remember we have to line it up below the first one to where it would look like it's one big graph, or not one big graph, but one big number line. So we know that 0 is going to be in between -∞ and +4. So we put that point there. And then we have +∞. So +∞ is going to be greater than 4, so it has to be to the right of 4. So we have +∞ right there. 0 is going to have a hollow point. And infinity has an arrow, so that indicates that it has a hollow point. Now, let's shade in our region. So we shade in this area, -∞ to +4, and then we shade in 0 to +∞. So now you can see where it lines up at. So it lines up from 0 to +4. That's where they intersect. So we write that down. And then 0 has a hollow point, so that means it has a parentheses. And then +4 has a shaded in point, so that means it has a bracket. And that's your answer. Now, for this problem, we have an intersection. So we have to do that strategy that we did before. Draw a number line for each piece of the interval and then line them up and see where they intersect. So we have -∞ and 0. So if we draw a number line for it, -∞ is going to be on the left, and we have 0. 0 is going to have a hollow point since it has a parentheses. And then we have +1 and +5. Almost made the mistake there. But we have to draw it to where they would line up in a certain way. So +1 is going to be to the right of 0 if it were on one whole number line. So we put 1 there. And then we have +5, which that's going to be to the right of 0 as well. And both points have a bracket, so that means it's going to have shaded in points. Now, if you notice, these don't line up. They don't intersect anywhere. If you would shade in the region, you would see that they end up don't intersecting at all. So what's the answer to this? Well, the answer is going to be this symbol, denoting that it's an empty set and there's no simplification for this intersection for this certain interval. So this right here is going to be your answer. So for this problem, it's the exact same as the last problem except the symbol is switched. Instead of an intersection, it's a union. So remember, for union, we have to plot all these points on one big number line. So we have -∞, which is going to be this arrow, and then we have +0, +1, and +5. So we go from least to greatest. We plot those. Now for 0, it has a parentheses, so that means it has a hollow point. And for +1 and 5, it has brackets, so we use shaded points there. Now, all we have to do is shade in the regions of our number line. So this left interval says it goes from negative infinity to 0. So we shade in this region. And then this right interval says it goes from positive 1 to positive 5. So when we write an interval notation, we have to start from left to right. So we have negative infinity, which we always use parentheses for infinities. And then we have 0, and 0 has a hollow point. So we have to use a parentheses there. Now we have this big gap in our interval, so we have to use a union symbol. And then we have 1, 2, 5. And then 1 and 5 have brackets, so we put the brackets there. And that's your answer. It turns out that there's no simplification for this union. It's the exact same as the one we were given before. Now, for this problem, we have an intersection. So we have to create a number line for each piece of the interval and then line them up. So we have negative infinity to positive 5. So when we draw a number line, this arrow is going to represent negative infinity. And then we have positive 5. And negative infinity has a hollow point, which is represented by the parentheses, even though it's not shown. And then we have positive 5, which has a bracket. So that means it has a shaded endpoint. So we shade in our region in between this interval. And then we have positive 5 and 8. So remember, we want them to line up as if they were on the same number line. So we have positive 5. So positive 5 is going to be right under positive 5. And then positive 8 is going to be to the right of positive 5. So positive 5 has a bracket, so that means it has a shaded endpoint. And then positive 8 has a parenthesis, so that means it has a hollow point. And we shade in this region as well. Now, if you notice, they don't intersect much. The only piece they intersect is this positive 5. So how do we write this for the simplification in interval notation? Whenever you have a single value in your interval, you use braces, which are these little parentheses, different type of parentheses. So we use braces, and since the only value that it intersected in and we simplified it to was positive 5, so you put 5 in between those braces. And that's your answer.